My first El Nino outlook, ENSO outlook. Um, Starting off here, we have the Climate Prediction Center forecast. This is their May forecast. This was made about 2 weeks ago. And they are saying an El Nino watch, which basically means the conditions are favorable for El Nino or La Nina. In this case, it's El Nino. But El Nino should develop soon, according to them. I think the conditions or the forecast is like 98%. That's a relative. That's the strength forecast. But yeah, here's the forecast just for the phase. This isn't strength, and you can see El Nino probabilities by May, June, July, and then especially by summer are above 90%. So very, very likely to be El Nino. But the question is not will it be El Nino. It's more about what will the strength of the El Nino be. Will it be a weak event? Will it be a moderate event or a strong event? And so if you look at their forecast for strength, what we see is that in the peak, which is around November, December, January, that's when El Nino peaks. It's a 37% chance of a very strong event or super. If you hear about that, 30% chance of a strong event, 22% chance of a moderate event, 9% chance of a weak event, and then 2% chance of a ENSO neutral. So super event, which is what's getting all the headlines, is at about 37%, which is not high, but it is also the highest number. So there's just, it's not as though it's a guarantee, but according to this, it's the most likely outcome. Although I will say not by much, right? Strong is behind it, 30%. Of course, this means that the odds of an event that's at least strong, so either strong or super, is 67% or 2/3. So a strong event is looking, I would say, likely. But super event is a little more in doubts. It's not that it's in doubts per se, it's just a bit more uncertainty around it. It's also worth noting that this outlook was made about 2 weeks ago, so the forecasters' thoughts may have changed. I don't know what they're thinking, but it's possible these could have gone down or up. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And of course, this is its peak, right? So in the beginning, it's going to be weak. You can see May, June, July, it's most likely going to be a weak El Nino, right? 72%. And then slowly moderate by July, August, September, it's moderate. That's the most likely. And then that switches to strong and then super. So just the evolution of the El Nino. All right, so that's the official forecast. Now, if we look at the temperature underneath the surface of the ocean, this is probably what's driving the big El Nino forecast and what's the fuel for the El Nino, if you will. If you look at all this warm water underneath the surface in the Pacific Ocean, right? It's plus 6 degrees, plus 6 degrees in a large swath, and plus 5 and plus 7, and things of that nature. So, very strong warm subsurface warm pool, as you would say. They even have to rescale this. Before this only went up to 5. Now they may have to go up. They had to switch it to 7 because the anomalies were that strong. So they have to rescale their map, which I think is pretty impressive. Also, if we look at the means, the thermocline, which is this 20-degree isotherm right here, is pretty flattened compared to climatology. In fact, if I go back out here and I go to the thermocline depth, this is the depth of the 20 centigrade, Celsius, I don't know why I said centigrade, isotherm. You can see this Kelvin, there have been several Kelvin waves, this one. This was triggered by the twin cyclones. This is the bigger one. There might be one here too. Like three Kelvin waves, I would say, but a monster one this April and May. And look how flattened the thermocline is, or how deeper than normal, which flattens it. the thermocline is in the Eastern Pacific, and then in the Western Pacific, it's starting to become shallower than normal. This is normal for developing El Ninos, where the warm pool gets discharged eastward, and then in the wake, a cold anomaly starts appearing in the Western Pacific. And in fact, if I go back here, you can sort of see it's weak now. It's not that strong, but this will build over the coming months. But yeah, now if you look here at this is a Matt and Julian oscillation homepage. The only thing I want to show, I'm not. This isn't really about the MJO in terms of what it's going to do, but the only thing I want to show is the 1 week verification of the GEFS and the statistical model. They use the CA model. And if we look, the GEFS pretty heavily underdid this MJO event in the Western Pacific. You can see now, this is surprising to me because I've seen the GEFS overdo a lot of West Pacific MJO events. Though this is a bias corrected version, so perhaps that's you know, adjusting for some of that, if you will. But you can see the observations much stronger with the MJO than the model. And that matters. Now, phase 7 is very El Nino favorable. It's the Western Pacific. It tends to be very westerly wind burst friendly. This does not mean that a strong El Nino is here, a super El Nino event, one MGO event overperforming the West Pacific does not mean that. However, it will trigger a stronger westerly wind burst. A stronger weakening of the trade winds over the next couple days. Just in a little bit. But yeah, its overperformance of the MGO could help, I think, get El Nino moving along a little bit. It's kind of stalled out over the past month. So I think that's something that's important to consider, the overperformance of the MGO in phase 7. Now, if we look at current sea surface observations, I'm going to put this on global mean. I'm going to do everything relative SST. This is what NOAA uses. You can use traditional. It doesn't. You have to be consistent, in my opinion, but I think relative is better. So what we see here is really weak El Nino conditions in the global mean. It's not. One thing to note is that the warm water appears to me to be centered north of the equator. There's warm water on the equator, but if you'll notice, from 5 south to 5 north, from 5 south to the equator, it's more like near normal than equator to 5 north. It's warmer than normal. It's been hovering. It's kind of stalled out. It's maybe gone up a tiny bit, but it's been hovering right around the weak El Nino to neutral thresholds, around 0.5, 0.6 C. So it's kind of stalled out, but it was also warming very fast in March and April. You can see by March 1st to May 1st, it effectively went from a weak La Nina to a weak El Nino. In terms of the ocean, now you have to have the atmosphere respond. So it's not exactly like we're in a weak El Nino right now. If you saw before with the Climate Prediction Center, they were only saying El Nino watch. So yeah, but the point is, we are in a weak El Nino state right now. That's Coral Reef Watch. OISST is arguably better, although it's not showing much different. It's showing, again, we're kind of go up, down, go up. Sorry, not go up. Go down a little bit and go up. But we're kind of hovering around that weak El Nino threshold. I can show you this. It's kind of similar. You also see the cooler southern hemisphere compared to the warmer northern hemisphere. Another thing to note, in my opinion, just I don't know, but maybe keep an eye on is this West Pacific and how much it cools. I think that will be important for our atmospheric response. If the West Pacific, specifically around Indonesia and just to the east of it, fails to cool properly, I don't know that we're going to get the 1997 type response in the atmosphere. Maybe we will. Maybe the East Pacific warms up so much that we do. But I can definitely see a 1997, 1982 type response in the ocean in the East Pacific. But in order to get the same atmospheric response, in my opinion, I think maybe Indonesia has to cool a little bit to aid in the suppression of convection there and the full reversal of the Walker circulation as happened in those years. So that's another thing I'm paying attention to. If we look at the change, we've changed over the past 30 days. It's warmed a little bit in ENSO, but not a ton. The PMM has really cooled off. It was almost record. I think it was also record strong. Maybe not record strong, but it was very strong earlier in spring. It has cooled off. Um, Most of the super El Nino events I look at actually don't have a strongly positive PMM. This could hurt any of the. I mean, it's not going to be a Modaki, but this could hurt the growth of Central Pacific warm anomalies, maybe. But the PMM is weakened pretty substantially. The Indian Ocean is also cooled. That could be due to the MJO that moved over there early in the month, increasing cloud cover and such. Or maybe it's something else. I don't know. But yeah, Indian Ocean cooling. The West Pacific has not cooled, so that's maybe not a warning sign, but this may be something to pay attention to if it fails to cool. But yeah, that's the 30-day change. And let's check OISST. Yeah, kind of similar. Some warming in the Pacific, huge downtrend in the PMM, and then cooling in the Indian Ocean. All right, so that's that. Now, if we look at the current analysis, new basin conditions, 30-day average tropical Pacific. All right, so you look at the tropical Pacific. You see, of course, generally weaker than normal trade winds. It's not a strong anomaly. It's not really anything to write home about. If this continued, you would almost certainly. I would be surprised if you got a truly super El Nino. Maybe you could, with this subsurface, it's going to be hard to avoid at least an upper and moderate. It's not possible that you get a weak event from this, but I think an upper and moderate is probably the realistic floor, if you will. But yeah, the point is this isn't going to cut it. That sidereal was just about like, even if we got this weak coupling to the atmosphere in terms of trade winds not really being that much weaker than normal, you could still get a pretty decent event just because of how warm the subsurface is. But another thing to note about this is that over the past, not month, but and a lot of this, this is a 30-day average, I think for like maybe 15 days of these, 20 days of these. Don't quote me exactly on this. The Magellan Oscillation has been moving through the Indian Ocean. Now, of course, I showed this earlier. It just went into the Pacific, but that was just now. This is the whole 30-day average. And the Indian Ocean MJO tends to strengthen the trade winds in the Pacific. So this is essentially fighting the MJO. So these are weaker trade winds, or with a how do you call it, a weaker they're fighting the normal, not base state, but like what typically happens during the Indian Ocean MJOs. Sorry, I might have been worded badly, but anyway, so yeah, these are maybe a bit more impressive than they look, but it's still, you still need the more maybe not westerly wind bursts. You probably don't need more Kelvin waves, but you still need more weaker trade winds to develop El Nino. Now we've got 200 zonal winds. 200 zonal winds, you want it to be easterly for El Nino and westerly for La Nina, anomalously. Look at it, it's easterly, but it's easterly north of the equator, which I think is a little interesting. It's westerly south of the equator. I would say this is, when I look, I think it's somewhat normal for El Ninos, for the 200 zonal wind to be slightly off the equator in May. That, I think that was being forecast by the climate models. This was like their forecast for May doesn't actually like show zonal wind anomalies for May. It was their forecast in April that I think was showing this for May. Don't like quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was showing this. So this was expected. It's not a full El Nino response, but this certainly looks to me more El Nino like than La Nina like. You can see, certainly easterly anomalies on the equator. westerly anomalies are uh, slightly more south of the equator than the easterly anomalies are north, if that makes sense. But yeah, so yeah, easterly anomalies not exactly centered on the equator, so it's not full El Nino yet. But yeah, then sea level pressure. I forgot to pull up the SOI, but this will give us clues to the SOI. See lower pressure in the west, lower pressure in the east. Sorry, my bad. And near normal pressure in the west. Probably global might be a little better for this. Yeah. So you can see definitely a more El Nino like structure, but not fully El Nino like because that high pressure response over Indonesia, over Australia. By the way, the 30-day SOI is sitting at like -12 or something, and the 90-day is sitting like -4.5, but that's dropped from 4 earlier this month. So the SOI 90-day average is dropping. 30-day it kind of fluctuates with the MJO, but it's been around like -12, -11, maybe -10 for the past like 15 days or so. So yeah, pretty I would say this is pretty El Nino like. In terms of velocity potential over the past 30 days, this is the Indian Ocean MJO I was talking about. Like, so a lot of rising motion over the Pacific, but once again, it's centered just a bit north of the date line. Not north of the date line, north of the equator. Sorry. Um, so this is not uh like fully El Nino like, but it's probably you know not a sign, but it's a signal of a developing El Nino. I would say the fact that there is rising motion in the Pacific, like this would not be certainly not a La Nina like look, and you can see the maritime continent over Indonesia is somewhat suppressive. It's not active. It's near normal. You do see shades of brown, but they're not striking. It's mostly near normal. And then you see a big brown anomaly in the Atlantic. That's pretty typical of El Nino. We get a lot of sinking air there. That of course will affect hurricane season among other things. But so I would say this is a lot of this is in the observations in terms of velocity potential and the 850 zonal. It's like it's like super close to being El Nino. I don't know what the Climate Prediction Center will do in June. We still have 2 more weeks of them to potentially declare it. But yeah, I think that this is like maybe not quite El Nino yet, but I think it's pretty close to seeing El Nino. Now, if we look at the models and what they're showing, go to Hovmolers. If we look at the EPS model, 0, 0. For some reason, that other run didn't run. I don't know why. Anyway, we see here is our Madden-Julian oscillation kind of coming through with our westerly wind anomalies. We had a westerly wind burst here. This is kind of in the far west Pacific, but we did have one. But this is what I was referring to earlier with our MJO. It's a pretty decent weakening of the trade winds right near the date line per the EPS. If I go back about like 3 days, this is that same wind burst. You can see it's much weaker, and it's uptrend in amplitude. So I don't want, for some reason that forecast didn't load, but it's uptrend amplitude, and I think that's in part due to the strengthening MJO signal in the Western Pacific. So that's 850 zonal. You can see over the next couple of weeks, generally just weaker trade winds. There's no huge sign of some westerly wind burst in terms of full weakening of the trade winds, but it's just general weakening of the trade winds. It should help the warm pool surface, and the water is warm as band summer. I don't see anything like extreme happening here. You do see this. This is the MJO pulse that moves through. But yeah. Now, if you look at velocity potential, which is another thing to look at, you can see, of course, the MJO pulse, but we also see some, the rising motion really set up over the Pacific, over the East Pacific, and sinking motion really set up for the West Pacific. And I think that's probably a sign that El Nino, the model is at least predicting El Nino is gonna start to couple to the atmosphere. That doesn't mean it's gonna happen because, of course, the model could be wrong. But if this were to happen verbatim, um, it's really trying to set up rising motion over the Pacific, downward motion over a sinking motion over the West Pacific and Indian Ocean, which is very El Nino like. However, of course, it has to last. Um, you know, a 15 days of these doesn't really mean much, but it does look like it's trying to show more a weaker Walker circulation essentially. Now, if you get 200 zonal wind, which remember you want, I don't know why S12Z didn't load, but whatever. You want easterlies. I think there's already a low frequency bias or a background state bias for easterlies. If you'll notice, these westerly anomalies really weakened in the as they went through the East Pacific, and then they re-strengthened, and these easterly anomalies strengthened, and then yeah, I just think there's a bit of a low frequency bias for easterlies in the Eastern Pacific. So that tells me that potentially the upper tropospheric Walker circulation is a bit weaker than normal. For the forecast is also for easterlies to continue. So yeah, I don't know why I have this open. And then the CFS model also, with a low frequency bias for the easterlies. And so yeah, and the European model is also predicting a very El Nino-like pattern with the negative velocity potential in the Eastern Pacific, positive in the Indian Ocean, and a westerly wind burst. So the point is that a lot of these models, the European model, the European weeklies, are predicting an El Nino-like atmosphere increasingly. And that will be crucial because if El Nino can couple with the atmosphere early, then I think a 1997 event would become more on the table.